When a narcissistic woman rejects you, the surface story looks simple. She lost interest. She chose someone else. She walked away. But psychologically, something very different is happening beneath that decision. Rejection, in this context, is not an ending. It is a move. And the move is designed to provoke pursuit. What she desperately wants you to do next is to chase, not because she wants closeness, but because she wants confirmation of power. In the narcissistic psyche, worth is not something felt internally. It must be extracted from the reactions of others. Your attention, your effort, your emotional investment become mirrors in which she sees herself as valuable. Rejection is the moment she tests how strong that mirror still is. Will you argue? Will you explain yourself? Will you try to prove that you are different, better, more understanding than the rest? Each step toward her, after rejection, restores her sense of dominance. The chase tells her, I still matter. I still control the emotional field. This is why the rejection often feels abrupt or cold. It is meant to destabilize you. Confusion weakens boundaries, and a weakened boundary is easier to cross. From a Jungian perspective, this is the activation of the shadow, your fear of abandonment, your need for validation, your unresolved wounds. She is unconsciously counting on you to act from that shadow rather than from consciousness. What makes this dynamic so dangerous is that it feels personal, but it is not. You are not being evaluated as a person. You are being measured as a source. The moment you chase, you accept the role assigned to you. You become the one who seeks, while she becomes the one who withholds. And in that imbalance, she feels alive. But here is the quiet truth. She never anticipates. Power collapses without participation. When there is no chase, the test fails. Silence does not wound her because it is cruel. It wounds her because it removes the mirror. Without your reaction, there is nothing to feed the illusion. And this is the reflection to carry with you. The most decisive response to manipulation is not explanation, emotion, or effort. It is self-respect expressed through restraint. When you refuse to chase what rejects you, you reclaim your center, and the game ends the moment you stop playing. After rejection, many people assume that what a narcissistic woman wants is distance or relief. In reality, what she is most attuned to is not absence, but reaction, and not just any reaction. She wants emotional collapse, confusion, anger, sadness, pleading, outrage. These are not inconveniences to her. They are confirmations. They signal that her rejection penetrated deeply enough to destabilize you, and that destabilization feeds her inner narrative of superiority. From a psychological perspective, the narcissistic structure is fragile. Beneath the surface confidence lies a constant fear of insignificance. Emotional reactions from others function as proof of impact. If you fall apart, it reassures her that she still has the power to shape inner worlds beyond her own. This is why your pain often feels oddly ignored or even subtly provoked. She is not moved by it in the way a healthy individual would be. She is regulated by it. Carl Jung spoke of the danger of unconscious identification with the shadow. In moments of rejection, the shadow rises quickly. Fear of abandonment, wounded pride, the urge to defend one's value. When you act from this place, you believe you are expressing authenticity. In truth, you are being pulled into a psychological script written long before you arrived. The more intense your emotional display, the more predictable you become. This is why calm unsettles her. Emotional neutrality creates a void she cannot interpret. When you do not argue, do not collapse, do not demand explanations, you interrupt a pattern she relies on to feel real. Strength, in this context, is not coldness. It is containment. It is the ability to experience emotion without surrendering control of it to someone else's pathology. And this is where the dynamic quietly reverses. Emotional restraint forces her to confront what she spends her life avoiding, her own inner emptiness. Without your turmoil to manage her feelings, she is left alone with them. That is not something she expects, and it is not something she handles well. So remember this: your emotional discipline is not suppression, it is sovereignty. The moment you refuse to collapse for someone else's comfort, you step out of their control and back into yourself. After the rejection, something subtle but corrosive often begins to take place inside you. The external event is over, yet internally the questioning starts. What did I do wrong? What did I miss? Why wasn't I enough? This is not accidental. One of the deepest things a narcissistic woman wants after rejecting you is for you to turn against yourself. Self-doubt is not a side effect of the rejection. It is one of its intended psychological outcomes. When you begin to doubt yourself, you unconsciously hand over authority. Your inner compass weakens, and in that weakened state, her perspective becomes more influential than your own. You replay conversations, search for hidden meanings, and reinterpret your identity through the lens of her approval or disapproval. This inner fragmentation makes you far easier to manipulate, because a person who does not trust their own judgment will seek certainty from the very source that destabilized them. Carl Jung understood this dynamic well. He warned that when consciousness collapses, the psyche seeks orientation externally. In moments of rejection, the ego is wounded, and the shadow fills the gap. The shadow whispers that you are flawed, inadequate, or fundamentally unworthy. And if you listen closely, you will notice something important. Those thoughts do not originate from objective truth. They arise from emotional injury. The narcissistic personality thrives when others internalize blame. Your self-doubt allows her to maintain an image of superiority without having to confront her own limitations. If you believe you were the problem, she never has to examine herself. This is why clarity feels so dangerous to the dynamic. The moment you say, "This experience does not define my value," the psychological grip loosens. What restores balance is not positive thinking, but grounded self-trust. You do not need to rewrite the past to understand it. You only need to stop interrogating yourself as if you were on trial. Rejection reveals compatibility, not worth. When you hold that distinction firmly, the internal noise begins to settle. And this is the reflection to leave with. The most powerful act after rejection is to refuse the story that your value depends on someone else's perception. The moment you reclaim your self-trust, the manipulation loses its foundation, and you regain your center. Even after rejecting you, there is often an unspoken expectation that you will remain nearby, emotionally open, reachable, and willing. This is one of the most overlooked dynamics in narcissistic psychology. Rejection does not mean release. It means repositioning. She wants distance without disconnection, separation without consequence. Your continued availability becomes a safety net, a quiet assurance that she can return whenever her sense of self begins to fracture. From her perspective, availability equals insurance. It allows her to explore other sources of validation without fully letting go of the old one. If attention elsewhere fades, if admiration dries up, or if loneliness surfaces, she wants to know that you are still there, still responsive, still caring, still emotionally accessible. This is not intimacy. It is psychological storage. You are kept not as a partner, but as a resource. This is where many people misunderstand their own role. Staying available feels mature, compassionate, even dignified, but psychologically, it communicates something else entirely. That your boundaries are negotiable under emotional pressure. And once that message is sent, the imbalance deepens. You wait. She decides. You remain emotionally invested. She remains emotionally detached. She remains emotionally detached. In that imbalance, she retains control. Carl Jung spoke often about individuation, the process of becoming whole by reclaiming one's psychic energy. When you remain available to someone who has rejected you, your energy stays externally bound. You orbit their moods, their signals, their potential return. Individuation cannot occur in orbit. It requires separation, not as punishment, but as psychological necessity. What truly disrupts this dynamic is not anger or confrontation. It is withdrawal with clarity. When availability disappears, the illusion of control collapses. She is forced to face something she actively avoids. The reality that access to you is not guaranteed. That realization is deeply unsettling to a narcissistic structure because it introduces limits where entitlement once lived. So, consider this carefully. Availability after rejection is not kindness if it costs you self-respect. Distance is not cruelty if it restores balance. When you choose to remove yourself from a role you were never meant to play, you send a message, not to her. You send a message, not to her, but to yourself. And this is the thought to carry forward. The moment you stop being emotionally available to those who discard you, you stop living as an option and begin standing as a whole person again. After rejection, silence becomes one of the most psychologically charged spaces in the dynamic. And this is precisely why she wants you to break it. A narcissistic woman often expects that sooner or later you will reach out seeking closure, clarity, reassurance, or even conflict. Any form of contact serves the same purpose. It confirms that she still occupies space in your inner world. Silence threatens that assumption. From her perspective, no contact is not neutrality. It is defiance. It interrupts the familiar rhythm where she acts and you respond. When you message her, even with dignity, you restore the emotional hierarchy. You place her back at the center as the one who is being sought, questioned, or explained to. This is why breaking silence often leads not to resolution, but to renewed confusion. The response you receive is usually vague, delayed, or emotionally inconsistent. Not because she is confusion, but because confusion keeps you engaged. Psychologically, this works because the human mind seeks narrative completion. Unanswered questions create tension, and tension demands relief. She relies on this. By withholding clarity, she increases the likelihood that you will reach out again, each time surrendering a little more of your internal stability. The silence becomes unbearable, not because it is harmful, but because it forces you to sit with uncertainty, something most people are not trained to tolerate. Carl Jung understood that growth requires the capacity to endure psychic tension without premature resolution. Breaking no contact is often an attempt to escape that tension rather than transform it. When you resist the urge to explain yourself, mend your intentions, or seek emotional repair from the person who caused the rupture, something shifts. The energy that once flowed outward begins to return inward. This inward movement is deeply destabilizing for someone who depends on external reactions to regulate their self-image. Your silence removes the stimulus she expects. Without it, she is left confronting a lack she cannot easily soothe. And that is why silence feels so powerful, not because it punishes, but because it refuses participation in dysfunction. So consider this carefully. Not every unanswered question requires an answer. Not every unanswered question requires an answer. Not every emotional discomfort needs immediate relief. Sometimes the most mature response is restraint. And this is the reflection to leave with. When you stop reaching for closure from those who destabilized you, you discover that clarity was never something they could give. It was something you were meant to claim for yourself. What a narcissistic woman almost never anticipates after rejection is self-respect expressed through detachment. She expects emotion, explanation, reaction, or at the very least, lingering presence. What she does not expect is quiet dignity, the kind that does not announce itself, defend itself, or seek validation. And this is precisely why it is so disruptive to the dynamic. From her internal logic, people exist in roles. There are those who pursue, those who react, those who remain available, and those who can be pulled back when needed. Detachment, with self-respect, does not fit into any of these categories. It creates a psychological blind spot. When you walk away without bitterness or performance, you refuse the script entirely. There is no conflict to manage, no emotion to extract, no ego to regulate. The absence of drama becomes the statement. This is deeply unsettling because narcissistic control depends on predictability. Emotional reactions are predictable. Explanations are predictable. Even anger is predictable. But calm withdrawal is not. It signals something she cannot easily reinterpret, that you no longer see her as central to your self-definition, and that threatens the very structure she relies on to feel significant. Carl Jung described individuation as the movement toward inner authority, the point at which a person no longer requires external approval to remain psychologically stable. Self-respect after rejection is a lived expression of that process. You do not need to convince anyone of your worth when you are anchored in it. Detachment is not avoidance. It is alignment. It is choosing not to remain emotionally entangled in what no longer honors you. What's important to understand is that this is not about punishing her or proving a point. The power lies in not needing to be seen, doing anything at all. When you detach cleanly, you remove yourself as a source of validation. And without that, the psychological game collapses on its own. So carry this with you. Rejection only diminishes you if you abandon yourself in response to it. When you leave with dignity and remain rooted in self-respect, you don't just end the dynamic, you transcend it.